to the slides with a story and a little bit of information before we get into the towns underwater. In 1887 or 1877, a guy named John Wesley Powell, who was the first man to go down the Colorado River, made the comment, "The American West will be determined by acre-feet of water." He recognized very early that water was going to be very important in the history of the West. And then, as more and more people began to come into the West, and especially into Southern California around San Diego and Los Angeles, it became obvious that water was even more important. And as a result, a lot of litigation occurred. Court case 19-1-19-7, decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, Kansas versus Colorado. Kansas said that Colorado was taking too much water out of the Arkansas River and depriving their farmers of water downstream, and the Arkansas heads above Leadville. Colorado won that case because Kansas couldn't prove that they had been denied the water. And one of the problems that Kansas had was when it was saying that they were being deprived of water, they were doing the same damn thing to Oklahoma downstream. This case took a lot of time, cost a lot of money. Neither party got what they wanted. But it took another court case to finally figure out that litigation wasn't the way to go. And that was Wyoming versus Colorado, 1911 and 1922. This one took 11 years to decide. Cost more money, and neither side got what they wanted. And this involved Wyoming suing Colorado because the people around Fort Collins in the Poudre Basin were trying to take water from the Laramie Basin and a tunnel taking it underground from the Laramie Basin into the Poudre Basin. Now, the Supreme Court ruled that you can move water from one basin to another, but only if you have prior water rights. And Colorado only had 15,500 acre-feet of water rights, not enough to build that tunnel. By then, both parties now knew, the parties on the Colorado River, that litigation wasn't going to be the way to settle who got what. And as a result, in the hot summer of 1922 at Santa Fe, New Mexico, Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover brought all 7 representatives from the 7 states on the Colorado River and its tributaries together to decide who was going to get what. And the first thing that the Colorado River Compact, as it soon would be known, studied all over the world, number one was you divided the states into upper basin and lower basin. The lower basin states where the waters flowed to Nevada, Arizona, California. The upper basin where the waters headed were New Mexico, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah. The dividing line would be a place where a guy named John Lee ferried people across the Colorado River back in the 1880s, and was known as Lee's Ferry or Page, Arizona. Anything below that is lower basin, anything above that is upper basin. That's number one. Number two, according to studies, the Colorado River, everybody thought, produced 20 million acre-feet of water a year. An acre-foot of water is 1 foot of water over 1 acre. Now, politics got in the way, and there really wasn't 20 million acre-feet. Since 1922, there's been 14 million acre-feet. But the upper basin states agreed to allow 7.5 million acre-feet of water to go by Lee's Ferry down into the lower basin states. Colorado was very lucky to have one of the greatest water lawyers in the world as their representative, and his name was Delph Carpenter from Greeley. Carpenter was very worried that with the increasing population in Southern California around San Diego and LA, that under the doctrine of prior appropriation, which was the water doctrine for the West, first in time, first in use, and use it or lose it are the two tenets of that water doctrine, that eventually Southern California would be able to claim all the unappropriated water and nothing would be left for the upper basin states. So, with that decision to let 7.5 million go downstream, 7.5 million stays upstream, and theoretically got 5 million in reserve. This is a big, gigantic end around the doctrine of prior appropriation. So it didn't make any difference if the upper basin states couldn't use the water. They still had 7.5 million acre feet in the future when they might be able to use the water. And then Delph Carpenter got another provision. And it said that the Colorado River Compact will last in perpetuity. That means forever. He did not want the Supreme Court or the Congress of the United States changing it. Now, I always think of George Bernard Shaw talking about two young people who are going to get married. You bring them up in front of a minister or a priest and you say, do you promise to love, honor, and obey forever? And George Bernard Shaw said, you shouldn't do that. You should say, do you promise love, honor, and obey for 6 months, and then we'll take a look at it. Well, within perpetuity, that isn't going to happen. And then the last thing that came. There's only one entity in the United States with enough money and power and influence to build dams and irrigation projects and reclaim federal lands. And John Wesley Powell was the father of government bureaus. BLM, Forest Service, Bureau of Reclamation, National Park Service, United States Geological Survey. Now, the Bureau of Reclamation was created in the year 1901. If we'll harbor and river bills in the east, then we damn sure could take federal money and build projects to reclaim federal lands in the west. Now, 1922 Colorado River Compact has been settled. 34 years later, it became obvious to a lot of people in Washington, D.C., including a man named Wayne Aspinall, that the upper basin states did not have enough storage facilities to hang on to the water, to send it to the lower basin states to meet our commitments when they needed it later in the year. Hoover Dam had been built in the 1930s. However, with all the runoff from the upper basin states, it would fill up Hoover Dam, and then all of that water, excess water, would flow to the ocean and not be used by Southern California. So you needed to be able to hold it in the upper basin states. Wayne Aspinall was born in Ohio in 1896. His family moved to Palisade, Colorado, and he grew up on a peach farm. He graduated from college and became a lawyer. Served in World War I. 1930 to 48, Colorado State Legislature. 1948, elected as our 4th District Representative, the only one from the western slope of Colorado. Very early, he becomes the head of the House Interior and Insular Affairs Committee. All land and water legislation goes through that committee. Nobody's voting on it in the House of Representatives unless the committee decides to get it out of committee. Wayne Aspinall always knew more than the experts testifying before his committee. One day, Wayne Aspinall was a Democrat. Phil Burton, San Diego, 5-term Democratic representative, was interviewed in the paper, and he said, Wayne Aspinall's committee is run so tightly that you have to raise your hand before you can go to the bathroom. Representatives had to raise, that was true. Next morning at 7:30, Phil Burton gets a phone call from Wayne Aspinall, says, Phil, I want you in my office at 8 o'clock ASAP. Burton comes into Wayne Aspinall's office. Wayne Aspinall says, Phil, is this stuff in the paper that I read true? And Burton said, yes, Mr. Chairman, it is, but I was kind of kidding. Wayne Aspinall said, Phil, you got a river and harbor bill out there in San Diego that we want to get through, don't you? And Phil Burton said, "Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do." He said, "Do I make myself clear?" said Aspinall. There won't be any more smart-ass comments about that unless you want that river and harbor bill to get through. In 1963, John Kennedy called Wayne Aspinall. He said, "Wayne, we'd like to get that wilderness bill through so I can run on it in 64. Wayne Aspinall said, "Well, Mr. Chairman, we're not going to get to it this term, but we'll get to it first thing next term." President Kennedy said, "Thank you, Wayne," hung up the phone. Nobody messes with committee chairman, not even the president. So, Wayne Aspinall now gets the Upper Colorado River Storage Act of 1956. And the Upper Colorado River Storage Act of 1956 created 6 dams on the Colorado River and its tributaries. Flaming Gorge, southern Wyoming. Navajo Dam near Farmington, New Mexico on the San Juan River. Glen Canyon Dam, Page, Arizona, backing up water and creating a new reservoir called Lake Powell. And 3 dams on the Gunnison River. Blue Mesa, Morrow Point, and Crystal. And that's a little background to what we're going to talk about today. And that's how everything got started. Because when those dams went in, and Blue Mesa went in 1965, that meant that a lot of resorts and a lot of towns that existed along the Gunnison River are now going to be covered up by water. Now, I brought a book along. One of my good friends, a guy named Dave Primus. And Dave has written a book called Beneath Blue Mesa. And he covers every one of those resorts and every one of those towns. He did a fantastic job. So I'm just going to briefly go through the ones that are now covered up by water, starting with Never Sink, which is west of town. And by Never Sink, they got a campground. And on that campground, that is where the Gunnison Poor Farm was. If you're poor and indigent, you go to the poor farm and the government takes care of you. We don't have them today, but we had them back then. And then you come to Cooper's Resort. And at Cooper's Resort, the most famous trout in the nation hung out below a big rock in a big pool of water, written up in Sports Illustrated, and his name was called Geronimo. Everybody thought he was maybe a 10 to 12 pound German brown. And a lot of people said they hooked him. And the newspaper one day said this: that trout now weighs 500 pounds because of all the lures in his body from the people who hooked him. The famous Geronimo, out by Cooper's. We're going west now. The next place is called Hierro or Aberdeen Junction. And that is where the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad have a 5-mile spur that ran out to the Aberdeen Granite Quarry, and that granite was taken by rail to the main line at Hierro, about 5.5 miles west of Gunnison, and then shipped out to Denver, where it was put in place in 1892 for the outside of the Colorado State Capitol building. The inside of the Colorado State Capitol building is made out of Colorado marble, from Marble, Colorado. Next is the Jointed Rod Resort. It's about 6 miles out of town. Now, a lot of these resorts are next to the railroad, and the railroad mostly was on the south side of the Gunnison River. So how are you going to get to the north side of the Gunnison River where these resorts were in a lot of ways? Well, you got there, and Pam and Tim Williams are here, and they got a boat at Island Acres. You got a boat, and you got a rope. When you go across the river, you always have to have the front of the boat against the water. And by pulling the boat, you went across the river. And if you didn't know what you were doing, you went into the river. Now, the first photo I'm going to show is a person on a chair going across the river. At high water, it was pretty dangerous. And then the next one to the west was called Fountain Place. And Fountain Place is right where the Beaver Creek runs into the Gunnison River. And it was named for a large fountain surrounded by elk antlers in front of the resort. And right there at Fountain Place, they had a fish hatchery, state fish hatchery. And 1 million eggs were taken to Pitkin or the Gunnison hatchery, and some went out to Denver, and then they hatched into fingerlings. And the fish hatchery was there for a long time. Now, at the Poor Farm, a family named Mensk, M-E-N-S-K, owned it. And they knew a guy who worked for him for a little while called Jack Dempsey. Jack Dempsey worked in the Gold Links mine at Ohio City. He worked in the Gunnison shoe store. He worked in the hayfields of Gunnison all the way out to Grand Junction. Born in 1895, became the heavyweight champion of the world from 1919 to 1926. All you need to know about Jack Dempsey is a famous fight he had against Jess Willard while Dempsey was the champion. Willard was 6'6", 250 pounds, and was from South America. He was called the Wild Bull of the Pampas. What a great fighter. Dempsey about 6'1", 195. In the third round, Willard caught Dempsey with an overhand right and knocked him out of the ring into a bunch of sports writers and their typewriters. It took Dempsey 30 or 40 seconds to get back in the ring. He proceeded to knock Willard down 7 times and hit him when he was on his knees and knocked him out. Later in the locker room, they asked Jack Dempsey what he thought of as he disappeared between the second and third strands of the rope. And Dempsey said, "I remember the days back in Colorado and Utah when I fought on a Saturday night, and you never know who you're going to fight against." And he said, "Tonight I was fighting just like I was fighting back then. Tonight I wasn't fighting for the championship. I was fighting to keep from getting killed." Enough on Jack Dempsey. Then we came to Eagle Rock. It was named Eagle Rock because eagles hung out on the rock on the right side of the road. And then the Wilderness, which had a dance hall. Lee Spann, a rancher west of town, told me about a great fight that occurred at the Wilderness between Glenn Songer from Crested Butte, a miner, and a rancher whose name he couldn't remember. The fight started in the Wilderness, came out to the lawn, came out to the edge of the river, and finished off in the Gunnison River. Those are the kind of things that could happen. You go to Elmont for a dance, and the ranchers and the miners, there was always a fight. Always. Then you came to Elkhorn. Then you came to the town of Iola. Then you came to the Rippling River Resort. Then you came to the Stevens Ranch and the Lady of the River Resort. Now they got a place called Stevens Point. And at Stevens Point, 2 brothers named A.K. and P.T. Stevens had a cattle ranch. And P.T. Stevens decided to raise sheep. And he and a guy from Utah brought in 1,000 sheep. And they were going to bring them in and keep them there until they had lambs and then move them out. And they'd been warned by ranchers not to do it. This is 1901. In August of 1901, 20 cowboys with masks on their face and the horses' hooves shod came in, tied up the 2 sheep herders, and then with iron drills and hammers killed 1,000 sheep. And then left with the admonition, they better be out of here in 10 days, otherwise we're going to take care of the rest of them. That was all part of the cattle-sheep conflict that occurred in the Gunnison country. One of the big areas was up on the Slate River by O.B. Joyful. same thing happened. Taylor Park, same thing happened. Cattle-sheep conflict. Then you come to the sunny side. Oh, incidentally, P.T. Stevens, that was enough for him. He left to go out to California. And 40 miles to the east of L.A., to the west of L.A., he decided that he would build a home. And then he began to irrigate. And he raised onions. And then he began to raise other stuff. And pretty soon, the climate was so good that he built a hotel. And a lot of people began to come in from L.A., including some movie stars. And they got a tram there today. It goes up to 7,000 feet. And P.T. Stevens has a monument to him because he is the father of Palm Springs, California. That's where he went when he left the Gunnison country. Palm Springs. Then we come to Kezar, a town that I'll talk about momentarily. Then it's Tex Lodge. And then it is Trout Haven. And then it is Savoia. And then it's Saponaro. Now at Savoia, the Moncrief family came in and bought Mr. Carpenter out. J.J. Carpenter was bought out. And the Moncriefs own that ranch. And the Moncrief family, still around, you know, Moncriefs have a ranch west of Gunnison. They made the movie Dallas based on Tex Moncrief, became one of the great oil men in the U.S. after 17 dry wells. He and a guy by the name of Amon Carter, who owned the Fort Worth Telegraph newspaper, collectively now owned Carpenter's ranch at Savoia. Carpenter had sold it out to them. Carter wanted to get out and sell. Moncrief didn't. So they played a card game to decide who was going to be able to make the decision. And it was called Show Low. And if you're driving to Phoenix, high above Phoenix, about 1,100 feet, you go right through a town called Show Low, Arizona, near Snowflake. Show Low means that each guy draws one card, and whoever's got the lowest card wins. Amon Carter drew a 6. Tex Moncrief drew a 3. Bought Amon Carter out. And the Moncrief Ranch still exists today, near Savoia. All of those resorts that I've just mentioned were tourist, fishing, and hunting resorts. And in the early days, these ranchers, they were ranchers initially, would have friends visit them. And they stayed to fish and to hunt. And one of the ranchers told me, those people forced me to build cabins. And the ranchers built cabins. And that's how the resorts got started. And during down years, they made good money off of these tourists coming in to hunt and fish. In the early days, in the 1880s, and I've got photos of it, every spring, sands, metal screens would be placed across the Gunnison River west of town. And 1.5 to 2 tons of suckers would be taken out and put on the bank to die so the trout would survive. One of the great things that happened on the Gunnison River was the willow fly hatch. Hellgrammites. When the willow flies hatched out on the Gunnison River, fish, rainbows, and German browns leap into the air, fought each other hand to hand to get those insects. Palmer Hoyt, the head of the Denver Post, owner of the Denver Post, had a standing order to the telegrapher at Iola. When the willow flies hatched out on the Gunnison River, he immediately got a telegram, and Palmer Hoyt came out on the train and was out there for a week fishing with the willow flies. There was a navy that existed on the Gunnison River called the Gunnison Navy, which started in 1939, ended with the reservoir about 1965. Pete Eastman, George Bessie, John Zugeller, Johnny Knowles, and Louis Miller were the leaders of 18 who got bylaws. To become an admiral, you had to tip your boat over and go into the water. All these guys got their boats from catalogs from a kit. And then the kit, canvas, airplane dope, 12 to 15 feet long, had 2 seats. The wife usually sat in the back seat. She wasn't fishing. Queen for a Day, the famous radio program, offered a free fishing trip on the Gunnison River to the winner. And then in 1944, Warner Brothers made a 10-minute sports short shown to all the servicemen around the world about the Gunnison country and fishing. It ends with a fish fry at McDermott's cabin, and it said it was the world's only mountain stream navy. The publicity led to a lot of tourism. Governor Dan Thornton of Colorado, from Gunnison, you go west of town, that's where Thornton's ranch was, right at the mouth of Ohio Creek. He was governor from 1950 to 54. Whenever guests would come in, Dan Thornton would have the Gunnison Navy take him down the Gunnison River. In that short that went out to the servicemen, it said, the Navy protected people from the voracious, rampaging, well-muscled trout in the Gunnison River. If you were a rear admiral, you got your ass wet in the water. If you were a vice admiral, you oogled the good-looking girls or you snuck a drink. If you didn't have a kit and that canvas canoe and yet a rubber raft, that was called an elastic Commodore. If you rode in a rubber raft. Now, one thing I didn't mention, right by the Lake City Bridge, Vulcan is a great gold town to the south. When gold ended, they had a lot of sulfur, and they took that sulfur by wagon. They had a refining mill at Vulcan, and by wagon they took that sulfur to a place called Hall's Spur, right by the Lake City Bridge, and then it went on into Denver. Unfortunately, that's 1909. In 1910, a lightning hit the refining plant, burned it up, and that was it for that. One of the places that was located just outside of a town called Iola was a town called Kezar. Kezar, 1 mile west of Iola. Started in 1881 when the Denver Rio Grande Railroad built west. It was an end of track. It had 5 saloons, a couple of buildings. The Ute Indians had camped there early. The land above is still today called Kezar Basin. Many ranchers had ranches nearby, and they would sell their hay at $70 to $125 a ton in 1881 in bad year. I mean, that's unbelievable. In 1882, Kezar had 5 saloons, a general store, 2 boarding houses, and a dance hall. When the railroad moved on, Kezar life ended after 3 weeks. All it was an end of track. And a lot of those buildings were now moved to Iola. At Iola began in 1896 when A.K. Stevens moved those Kezar cabins over. 4 hotels, post office, school, store, 100 people, stockyards, depot, sidetrack of 627 feet. It was a great tourist, ranching, railroad town. Shipping point for the Powderhorn Pool. Cows brought up from Powderhorn. Shipping point for Spencer and Du Bois and Taliaferro and the Gunnison Gold Belt. All came together at Iola. Cattle-sheep conflict I've already talked about. Savoia means wild onions, Cebolla, 7 miles to the west of Iola. Savoia River coming right off of Spring Creek Pass and Slumgullion Pass, flowing into the Gunnison River. Savoia was started by a man named J.J. Carpenter of North Carolina as a ranch in 1882, right at the mouth of Savoia Creek and the Gunnison River. He built the Sportsman's Lodge right there and 20 cabins right along the Gunnison River. Now, when you go north of town, going out of Gunnison, if you look on the left side of the road, you're going to see a yellow building and it says Savoia Apartments. That was the Sportsman's Lodge that was moved there when the reservoir came in. The original lodge burned down in 1902, but was rebuilt for $8,000 in north of Gunnison today. At Savoia, they had an orphan cub bear named Nellie that had great fame throughout Colorado. She would crawl up a small post where she would be rewarded with a bottle of beer. When she died in 1913, she got a stone monument there and headlines in every newspaper in the West. Captain James LeCount sent logs down Savoia Creek to the Denver and Rio Grande main line. That also happened in a lot of other streams in the Gunnison country. Those logs were used for mine props and railroad ties and cabins. Now, where I come from in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, I come from a great logging area, copper country, iron country, and those guys who sent logs down Savoia Creek had spikes on the bottom of their shoes. And they would be on those logs in the river as they went downstream, and their job was, with a big lance, keep logs from jamming up on curves so they didn't have a log jam. They call that burling today, B-I-R-L-I-N-G. And out of Lake Michigan, where I'm from, every 4th of July, they have a contest, and they got two guys on a log with the spikes, and they spin the log trying to knock the other guy off, and if you're good, you can make the water foam. We got a guy named Billy Olson when I grew up, 6-time world champion in burling. So if you can imagine coming down to Savoia Creek with these guys on the logs. In the year 1912, J.J. Carpenter's son, Howard Carpenter, went out on a hunting expedition near Steuben Creek. Steuben Creek is right by the Lake City Bridge, and you go off to the right. He is with 3 other guys and a Catholic priest named Father O'Farrell from Montrose. This is in October of 1912. O'Farrell and Howard Carpenter were together, and they went up on the West Ridge. A shot was heard at about 4 in the afternoon. When O'Farrell came back to join the others, he said he had shot a hawk. Howard Carpenter never came back. The next day, the Carpenter family searched, but 4 inches of snow had fallen. And they searched for the rest of the year, and even including part of next year, never found him. 1921, 9 years later, a guy working at a sawmill up Steuben Creek was out hunting, and he shot a rabbit. And when he went out to get the rabbit, he saw bones and clothes. And that was Howard Carpenter. And the coroner's report that Howard Carpenter's death had been caused by a bullet hole in the back of the head. 1921, 9 years later. Later on came out that Father O'Farrell, Howard Carpenter, was engaged to be married to a Montrose girl. 1 week later. Father O'Farrell evidently kind of liked the young girl. And nobody could prove it. But shortly after Howard Carpenter's body was found, Father O'Farrell committed suicide in Denver. Story of Howard Carpenter. The Dillon Pinnacles. We've all known them. Used to be called the Saponero Needles. Very famous rock formation past the second bridge. And then we come to Saponero, named for a sub-chief of the Ute Indians. located right where the Lake Fork runs into the Gunnison River. And there are the famous 4 bridges at Saponaro, and that picture hangs in Wall Street. Automobile bridge to Montrose. Automobile bridge to Lake City. Railroad bridge to Montrose. Railroad bridge to Lake City, all within 100 yards of each other, and you'll see that photo in the slides. It is also, Saponaro is also at the head of the Black and the Blue Mesas. Denver Rio Grande Railroad town, school, mercantile store, Rainbow and Saponaro hotels. 2 great freighters operated out of there before the railroad came. One guy was J.C. McClure, the other guy is David Wood. David Wood's daughters rode a... There is a lady in 1928 going by a cable over the Gunnison River in a chair. It's not a great picture, but that gives you an idea how you went from one side to the other. Next. There's an ice jam out at Cooper's Resort. That was a real problem in the spring of the year. Even before the reservoir, ice jams were common. You'll see more photos on that in a little bit. Next. There is the Poor Farm that is located where the campground is at Never Sink. Next. There's the Gunnison Navy and those kits coming downstream, fighting those voracious trout. Next. They're now having a picnic. They usually had a picnic out there by McCabe's Lane or even down by the Lake City Bridge. Next. There is one of the bridges over the Gunnison River, not far from McCabe's Lane. That's a railroad bridge. Next. The guy on the left is Sam Hartman, who was a brother to Alonzo Hartman. The guy on the right is Ralph Porter, who was a business manager at Western State. This is in the 1920s, and the boys evidently had a good day on the water. Next. There is Never Sink. Next. There's the sign that says Never Sink. Next. There it is again. Next. Ice jam, never sink. Next. Ice jam, never sink. Next. Ice jam, never sink. Next. There's Elkhorn, not far from the Lake City Bridge. That's the guy just shot a rabbit. Next. This is the dirt road, Highway 50, going out west of town. No paved road. That goes way back. Next. There it is again, dirt road, west of Gunnison. Next. There's the bridge. This is very early that goes over to Lake City. Before, obviously, the dam. Next. There is Eden's Resort. Again, not far from the Lake City Bridge. Next. Eden's Resort again, E-D-E-N. Next. P.T. Stevens. He's the guy who started Palm Springs, who had the sheep. Next. This is 1876 near Iola on a primitive road. You can see the way station and you can see the stage pulled by 4 horses ready to go out. Next. There is a wagon train going out of Iola in 1876. Next. This is not far from the Lake City Bridge, and to avoid an ice jam, they have dynamited the Gunnison River, and you can see the explosion. One of my jobs in the summer on construction was blowing stumps and rocks up with dynamite. And I can tell you, you got to be careful with dynamite. There's a reason why they freeze it. You give me a little nitroglycerin when dynamite sweats, and we'll take care of a lot of places fast. Next. There is the bridge that ran over the Gunnison River at Iola. Next. Same bridge. Next. There is Iola. Some of the homes and a garden in front. Next. There is the Big Little store. You can see the writing at Iola. Next. There are women and men helping to put up hay in the irrigated hay fields around Iola around the turn of the century. No baling, you're stacking. One of the problems the ranchers had was when the Denver-Rio Grande Railroad ran through there, a lot of times sparks would catch the haystacks on fire. They had to be real careful. But just imagine when you go out to the reservoir, imagine that when I first got here in '62, beautiful irrigated hay meadows. Next, skiing at Iola during a good winter. The skis were 9 to 14 feet long. Guide poles were about 7 feet long. Next, there is Iola, one of the homes at Iola with a horse waiting patiently in the foreground. Next. There is the only shot I've ever seen of all of Iola. It's not a great shot, but it shows you. Next. There is the station at Iola and the bus ready to pull out, 1930s. Next. Loading cattle. There are the corrals at Iola. Powderhorn Pool brings their cattle in. All the guys, the Mergelmans and the Blackstocks, bring theirs from Iola. They're going to ship them out on the Rio Grande in October. Next. And there they go. They've all been loaded up, and the Rio Grande train is headed out to the Denver stockyards. Next. When the reservoir came in, this is August 3rd, 1965, any buildings that weren't moved out were burned by the Bureau of Reclamation. Next, Savoia and the Sportsman's Lodge. Next, that's a great shot. There's the Rio Grande Railroad. There are those 20 cabins right along the Gunnison River to the left, and then right in the middle is the Sportsman's Lodge. Tremendous area. People came from all over the world. Some of the people who came, incidentally, who stayed at the Sportsman's Lodge and different places along the Gunnison River, Bob Hope, John Wayne, Debbie Reynolds, Herbert Hoover, Alice Faye and Phil Harris of the great radio program, Ben Hogan, the great golfer. They all came in. Doris Day. Next. Cows grazing in 1964, 1 year before that was going to be filled up with water. Next. There is the railroad track near Savoia and the highway, dirt highway to the right of it. Next. 1952, that's one of the last runs of the Rio Grande near Savoia. Next. There is the depot at Savoia, Rio Grande Depot. Next. There I got it on the back, Mr. and Mrs. Ames waiting at the Savoia Depot to catch the Rio Grande. Next. Great shot of the Sportsman's Lodge from afar at Savoia. Next. There it is. That's the one before 1902. It burned down, and then the original one you see north of Gunnison today is the new one. Next. Saponaro and the schoolhouse. Next. There is the Rainbow Hotel, one of the two hotels. One of the teachers said whenever they opened up school again in the fall, the mice and the rats had taken over. Next. There's Saponaro from up above. Sawmill on the left. Rio Grande Railroad and Highway in the middle. All the buildings up there in the upper right. Next. There is the gas engine that went down the track, making sure that there were no obstructions. Gas powered. Next. That is an advertisement for the Rainbow Hotel. Rates, $2 a night. Next. There's the Rio Grande. There's the schoolhouse and some of the Saponero buildings on the right. Remember, it is the head of the Black Canyon. That's where the Black Canyon starts. That's where they open up to the Black and the Blue Mesa. That's where you get to Lake City. That's where the four bridges are. Next, cutting ice on the Gunnison River, not far from Saponero. Every year, they had 5 ponds around Gunnison. Every year, they would have 5 cuttings, and they would have 25,000 tons of ice, 10,000 going to the Rio Grande. Before refrigeration, that's how you kept stuff okay. Every rancher had an ice house. Next, there's the bus waiting at Saponero, 1930s. Next, there are the 4 bridges. You can see them down by the water and then above the water. Auto Bridge, Railroad Bridge to Montrose, Auto Bridge, Railroad Bridge to Lake City. Next, this is the Sangosti family. Some of you might remember Sammy Sangosti from Gunnison from years ago. He's the little kid on the second from the right. And his dad worked for the railroad, and that's the whole family at Saponero. Next, cowboy with a horse coming out of the Saponero saloon. Next, 4 people from Denver who had a good fishing day. The guy's name on the right is Johnson. I forget the guy's name on the left. Their wives are in the front. Next. And that's the last photo. That is Craig Goodwin, famous rancher. His soon-to-be wife, Millie Carpenter. And that's at the Rainbow Hotel in Saponero. Enough said, everybody. Thanks for coming. Became barns for some of the ranchers, but those that they didn't think were very good were burned, yeah. But they tried to make use of everything that they had. Yep. Anything else? Yes, sir.
The Blue Mesa Reservoir has a water depth, and how much of that depth is the original canyon carved out, and how much of it is above that?
Well, the biggest depth is near Saponero at the head of the canyon. That's 300 feet. When you get out by Iola, you know, when it fills up, it's probably 20 or 30 feet. The Blue Mesa Reservoir has 46,000 acre-feet of water. And they're just about ready to have a flush. It's only be 1 day this year as opposed to 10 because it's a bad water year. And that flush goes all the way down through the Grand Canyon. And so Blue Mesa holds water that'll go into Lake Powell and then Lake Mead. And as you know, we've had a lot of dry years, so water is really important today. Any others? Yes, sir.
So those 4 bridges, they're still there.
Yeah, the bridges are underwater. And no, who took the picture? Dave Primus had somebody take a picture, and you got a picture of them underwater.
With the fish finder, right?
What's that?
With the fish finder?
With the fish finder, yeah, exactly. Anything else?
So how long did it take to actually create the lake that we, or the reservoir that we see?
You know, it started filling in 65, and I think the first fill was 76. Took them about 11 years to fill it up. But remember, they're working on the other dams also. When I came here in 62, I didn't know much about fishing. I would go to Saponero and I would walk down to the railroad grade and I would walk the railroad grade, and the fishing was unbelievable. And I would come back and it looked like I'd been in a fight. My arm was skinned up. I mean, because I'd catch a brown. The browns were kind of in the rocks right next to the railroad grade, and I'd be slipping and sliding and falling. But it was, I got great memories of it today. The Gunnison River was the one of the top 3 trout streams in the world. In the world. Any others?
How much notice did people have, like from the concept of?
Oh, they knew as soon as the Upper Colorado River Storage Act came in '56, they knew. And then they had to sell out with eminent domain, and it didn't get a whole lot. Now, initially, they thought of putting the dam in by Grand Junction at a place called Bridgewater. But then also, they had the water backed up almost to Gunnison until there was pressure from Wayne Aspinall that, no, it's not going to go that far in. Any other questions?
So they didn't get reimbursed for the property, right? Is that correct?
No, they did get reimbursed for their property by eminent domain. Eminent domain means that if it's in the public good, the government can take your property, but they got to give you fair value. But it really wasn't fair value. You know, they had no choice, had to sell out. Just imagine having an irrigated ranch out there with cows and having to leave your ranch. I mean, it's heartbreaking. Any others?
So Dwayne, you mentioned Bob Hope. Is there truth to the rumor he fell in the water somehow?
Yeah, Bob Hope was kind of an arrogant guy. And Dr. Mason Light had him in one of those kayaks. And everybody was in on this, and they got into a little rapid, and Mason deliberately put Bob Hope in the water.
Was it on a radio show?
Yeah, and on Bing Crosby's radio show, he talked about that. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah. Wasn't there supposed to be like a public land swap with the Bureau of Reclamation when they inundated some public lands by the area that was flooded? You know anything about that?
No, not that I know of.
And, I have another question. The lower reservoirs, did they inundate any towns or settlements or infrastructure?
No, not at Morrow Point, because now you're in the canyon. And Crystal's in the canyon also. Yeah. So it goes Blue Mesa. Blue Mesa is the one that holds the water. The others create electricity and, help out a little bit. Any others? Yes, sir.
How much did the dam change the flow in the canyon, Black Canyon?
Well, it depended on what they were going to do with the water. So sometimes when they left the lot go through, you had to be real careful if you were down there because the water could go up real fast. So they let people know what they were going to do. So it varied a lot. Today you can walk down about 1.5 miles, but I've seen years when right below the dam, that water's shooting out of there and you can't walk at all. It kind of depends on the time of the year and the water situation.
Historically, were flows higher?
What's that?
Historically, were flows higher before the dam?
I went through the Black Canyon with 2 friends in 1972. We always thought we were the first ones to go all the way. Or we were the second ones to go all the way. 2 guys had gone through Barsh and Gorsuch in 1934. I got a picture of myself at a place called the Narrows. It's a real tricky spot in the canyon. And I got my oar, and I'm standing there, and my oar is way above my head, and there is a ring on the canyon wall, like a ring on the bathtub, and that's how high the water was historically. We think that it got up at least to 9,300 cubic feet of water going through. When we went through, it was 2,700. I wouldn't go through at 2,800. 9,300, it'd be whoosh. And it'd be great in a way because it would cover up some of the waterfalls, but if you got in the water, you're dead. Anything else? If not, thank you very much for coming.
Question. What day of the year has the maximum flow of the Gunnison?
Well, I talked to the Upper Colorado lady today, June the 7th.
Okay.
But if you go back to 1880, it's June the 11th. And we both talked about that today. I told her I don't think we've hit the high water mark yet because it's been cold and rainy. If we get about 2 or 3 warm days, so it's me against her and the Upper Colorado River District. Yes, ma'am. Right now they're letting 200 out of Taylor, and there's 400 cubic feet at Almont. Incidentally, the Uncompahgre water users of Montrose They own the 106,200 acre feet of water stored in the Taylor Reservoir. They can call for that when they want. Now, the second fill is in Blue Mesa, and that's because they won't have to lower the water and kill the fish in the Taylor. So the second fill is in there, but they own that. And then the Gunnison Tunnel, which was built from 1904 to 1909, the longest irrigation tunnel in the world, 6 miles underneath Vernal Mesa from East Portal in the canyon by Morro Point all the way out to Lawani, about 8 miles out of Montrose. That water has saved. There would be no towns with names like Delta, Pea Green, Olathe, Montrose, Kelowna, or Ridgeway, because there's not enough water in the Uncompahgre River. And now the Gunnison Tunnel. That's another story. Maybe I'll do one for you guys a little later on the building of the Gunnison Tunnel. That was the first great Bureau of Reclamation project in history. The first major Bureau of Reclamation project in history.
What year again?
1904 to 1909, they built it. Now, if you got claustrophobia, you don't want to go in, but I've been in illegally once with the ditch rider and legally once with the county commissioners at 6 miles in a pickup through. And it's fantastic.
I have a question, Wayne. I've heard that Gunnison downtown used to be at the river where 1st Street, 2nd Street, 3rd Street is now, and that would have modeled Iola, Kezar, all of these others, right? Is that true?
No.
Okay.
The original cabins in Gunnison were north of the present town. But Gunnison, Gunnison is probably situated perfectly because it's not far from the Tomichi and the Gunnison rivers.
So Gunnison didn't have the same resorts, fishing, that kind of...
Well, the Island Acres that Tim and Pam Williams own, the ABC Motel, the Tomichi Lodge, absolutely. McCabe's Lane, absolutely they had some in Gunnison. You bet.
Luce Resort.
Yeah, Luce Resort, very good. Thank you, Cindy. Cottonhurst, which is up on Lost Canyon, absolutely, they had a lot of them. Rocky River.
Yeah, sure.
Yep. You bet.
Other questions for Dwayne? Okay, let's hear it.
Yeah, thank you very much, folks. I want to thank Alyssa for doing all the hard work and Elise for doing a great job here. She is the head honcho of the museum. Let's give her a nice round of applause.
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, I wanted to introduce myself for anyone I hadn't met. My name is Elise, and I took over from Melinda late last year, and I'm thrilled to be here and be working with folks like Dwayne and Steve. If you're interested, we have more Dwayne trips coming up. We've got one very soon. It's a tour of the quote-unquote gold and silver triangle in the Central Rockies. It's a week-long trip that's happening June 16th through 20th. We've also got some day trips coming up. The next ones we have with Dwayne are July 9th and July 23rd. So please check those out. And of course, we just wanted to thank you all for coming tonight. This is why we do what we do, to support you and continue our community understanding. Our mission here at the museum is to preserve and share the local history and traditions of Crested Butte and the Gunnison Valley. And we do that through members. So if you're not a member, please think about becoming one. It truly does support our mission. All of our members do. And of course, attending things like this, also, putting in a plug for our gift shop. Dara over here has actually just brought in the book that Dwayne had been referencing, so that should be in our gift shop shortly. So we try to make sure that we're offering the community those kinds of resources in there as well. And she's always keeping it updated, so definitely worth coming in and checking out.
We have we have Dwayne's books as well. We do have a photo book of the Black Canyon that has a lot more photos than we just saw, along with his Gunnison country tome.
Yeah, so lots of books available as well if you're interested in any of those resources. With that, was there anything else I missed with that? Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate you coming in.
Folks, before you leave, I'm going to tell you one more quick thing about the museum. Tony Mihelich was a legendary guy who had Tony's Conoco for over 50 years. And the Conoco gasoline company made a movie about him. When President Jimmy Carter was no longer president, he used to bring poor children in from Georgia to ski. And ex-President Carter would come in with 2 Secret Service men. And 2 Secret Service men would come into the Tony's Conoco, and if anybody was in, they would politely ask if they would mind leaving for an hour so President Carter could come in, sit next to the pot-bellied stove, and have 1 hour to ask Tony Mihelich questions. And I thought every damn president of the United States ought to have that.